top of our development agenda as enshrined in some of the aspirations of the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. This year, as per the African Union Theme of the Year, Art, Culture and Heritage, Levers for Building the Africa we want, the African Union Commission recognized the important role both positive and negative cultural play in societies. It is crucial that institutions and projects that address issues on the gender-based violence identify linkage with the theme of the year and synergize their activity to ensure that positive impact are recognized, commanded, and replicated, and negative impact are highly seriously addressed and clear-cut solution provided. The Department for Health, Humanitarian Affairs and Social Development, through the Social Welfare and Vulnerable Group Division, ensure that its activity for the harmful practice project in particular are in line with the theme of the year and clearly explore the effect of culture on the harmful practices and identify key areas. Ladies and gentlemen, however, we cannot discuss all these issues that our women and girls continue to face without recognizing the challenge that continuously presents themselves as we embark on this very important mission. Protection of girls and women need not only political will at the highest level of government, but also adequate budget allocation and multi-sectorial approach that include local CSO and families. I believe that most of us participating in this commemoration do not want their daughters, wives, female caregivers to be brutalized and neglected, especially in this difficult time of COVID enhancing GBV. How can we look at ourselves knowing that our girls and women are not respected and valued as asset to our society, including girls and women with disability who are more at risk? Through our AU policy and legal instrument, I urge you all to ensure strategy such as the Maputo Protocol, the African Charter on the Right and Welfare of the Child, the AU Protocol on Persons with Disability and Older Persons, and strategy on HTP, as earlier mentioned, are adapted from continental, regional, national, and community level to make an impact. Let's work together beyond discord and take strong action. We cannot afford to turn our head away from uncomfortable topic that we don't want to face. AU will always be committed to making sure that sustainable development included all. I thank you for your attention and wish happy Women's Day to all my sisters. Thank you so much.
And thank you, our keynote speaker this afternoon. Thank you for ably representing Mrs. Petrus-Barry. For purposes of progress, can we be advised, is Professor able to present her remarks? And is it appropriate for those remarks to come after the keynote speaker?
Dr. Angela, our colleagues from FAO are still trying to reach out to...
All right.
Yeah,
okay.
So we can proceed for now.
We can proceed. And as we proceed, I'd like to recognize our diverse participation. I would like to note that we have 89 participants now, and we have participants from Ghana. Welcome. I see Priscilla Elena Full, participants from Zimbabwe, from Kenya, Mr. Toyin from Nigeria, and other countries that I will highlight in due course. Welcome, everyone. Right now, the GMAC Secretariat would like to show a video from the CSO Forum, and I'll turn it over to the GMAC Secretariat.
Girls, just embrace to be a girl. Be sure that you are a human being, you are complete, you are, of course, growing, you are in development, but you are a whole. It's you. and nobody else. You are ours, and you have rights. And your rights, no one can take them from you, and you simply have to know them, to nurture them, and to enrich and to build your own personality.
That even though young girls and women are reporting issues of online harassment and cyberbullying, the perpetrators are still out there and they're continuing to bully other young girls and women. So we need to see stronger reporting mechanisms being put in place to ensure that girls and women are safe and free to be online. But above all, we need to ensure that we're having a gender responsive system to these social media platforms. As the co-writer of the Open Online Letter that was published by Plan Global, we have looked critically at how we need to address these things, and Facebook is here. So I'm going to take this opportunity to tell Facebook that we need you to involve us in ensuring that we are creating safer reporting mechanisms and stronger ones for young girls and women.
We were all created by God perfectly and wonderfully enough. There is no need to rectify or correct someone just by the way that person looks. And I really feel bad when a man or a strange person, even some of them do not even have their profiles. So they remain anonymous and they harass these girls. So for me, I feel that's very bad. Never judge someone by the way they look, because that's how God created them. And they must have a unique thing that you don't have.
Working with the Zambian Network on Ending Child Marriages, we have seen that the issue of adolescent sexual reproductive health is a critical component for ending child marriages, as well as having a reduction in teenage pregnancies. Now, during the COVID situation, what has happened is that everybody in the family is staying together at the same time. And so one strategy that has worked, which can work even elsewhere and all the time, is the fact that family members need to be present in the lives of adolescents.
As a girl, how has COVID-19 affected you?
It's difficult to read at home because many activities happen there. So I prefer school.
I've also enjoyed staying home. I've learned a lot from it. It has given me different opportunities that I wouldn't have gotten when I was in school.
There are many cases of early pregnancies. So I think if schools can be opened, it will reduce this, because I'm seeing my fellow young girls are just going to meet this education.
In Uganda, child labor has increased due to COVID-19 since parents lost their jobs. So they send their girl children to vend tomatoes to provide for their family. And this results into defilement. And some of these girls are transported from different parts of the country and are brought to Kampala to work as housemaids, barmaids, and babysitters.
Open in school, the government should consider that we need taps for washing our hands. We also need our dormitories to have well-spaced beds. Also, the bathroom should have water and cleaned very frequently.
So when I think of the internal struggles, the first two that immediately spring to mind are double standards and parenting. As a society, we teach our girls to aspire to marriage and instill in them the belief that marriage is the highest possible achievement that they can obtain, and that the success of their marriage is actually a measure of their worth as a woman, which is very, very wrong. And bringing this then into the parenting of African girls in the diaspora particularly, it's popular belief that African children raised abroad are disrespectful and we have no regard for culture. But what a lot of people fail to understand, and what the parents in particular fail to understand, is that the minute we walk out of the door, the society that we become submerged in is not reflective of these same teachings, and more particularly, the methods of parenting are not reflected.
This is amazing, Jima. Thank you for this video. It highlights voices from across the continent, young female voices, telling us their reality, and highlighting the double-barreled tool we have in terms of the internet as an avenue for education and for telehealth, but at the same time, which opens up new opportunities for online harassment and cyberbullying and all the ills that go with online engagement. I think this is the new reality we have, especially in the aftermath of COVID-19. Thank you so much to the CSO Forum for putting together this video, which gives us the situation from the mouth of young people across the continent. So with that, I would now like to turn to our first panel. Welcome to our first panel session, whose theme is Let's Choose to Challenge and Advance the Rights of Women and Girls in Africa. And we have a bench of 4 panelists. The first one will be Dr. Nyaradzai Gumbo Janda, African Union Goodwill Ambassador on ending child marriage in Africa. Dr. Nyaradzai is from Zimbabwe, and she has deep experience in crisis and conflict settings, and we look forward eagerly to listening to her submission on this panel. Dr. Nyaradzai, you're most welcome to address the webinar.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator, and again, my appreciation to the co-hosts for this very, very exciting webinar, which is also a moment we celebrate our own knowledge and challenge ourselves. I'm also excited as part of the GMAC network, where Rosaria Memorial Trust is the thematic lead. This year, as we know, the focus of the African Union is on arts, culture, and heritage. I also am quite inspired by how we dared to change the norm and started by affirming persons with disability at the beginning of our meeting, and for us to have sign interpretation and to have typing charts. Congratulations to the organizers. This is just what we need all the time, and which has been demanded. My focus is going to be on challenging ourselves again to end child marriage. And we know that there's been significant research already in the region around this issue. GMAC had this compilation of work being done even this morning. Plan was sharing the report for East and Southern Africa. And we know the issues on SRIH that IPPF, IPAS, and many partners have been raising. And we just had a presentation from the African Union Commission. So as the Goodwill Ambassador, I'm privileged to be in this discussion with you. But I'm here also still angry. I am angry, I am unhappy. Yes, I celebrate that the African continent has baskets and baskets of legal and policy frameworks on child rights, on women's rights, and on ending child marriage. We have continental strategic plans, we have initiatives, we have campaigns on girls' education, we have the Salema initiative and our own campaign on ending child marriage. The RECs, they have also been making effort with the SADC model law, which is giving a blueprint for the legislative agenda of member states. ECOWAS have been evolving a robust policy around child protection. And we know East African Community has also been doing some work around teenage pregnancy. So yes, there's effort. And yes, countries have launched their national campaigns to end child marriage. Others have national action plans to end child marriage. Others have amended some laws on child marriage, or some specific policies on education like re-entry, or on trying to grapple with the issues.
Sorry, Dr. Nyaradzai, just a moment.
But
French interpretation, please go to your
Yes.
channel, French channel. You're on English channel now. Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Nyaradzai.
Thank you. So, yes, we have all this which is positively happening, but is it sufficient? And is it, what can we do to accelerate? The data is telling that COVID-19 has introduced new issues. The crisis in education is not only about exacerbating what existed, it's introducing a disruption that we have never seen over a century, that for a whole year, kids are not going to school. And therefore, we have to be bold. And I think part of that first boldness is to reclaim language. We cannot continue to call this a marriage. We must not. It's a crime. It's an illegality. It's rape. It's multiple violations of multiple rights. And I feel we need to continue to express how abhorrent it is, how unacceptable the practice is, and how this illegality should not continue to happen. So I want to give a 6-point action points, a 6-point agenda on what we need to do for us to innovate, for us to accelerate interventions on ending child marriage. So the first is the issue of justice. I think for too long, we've been tinkering on the margins of the discourse on justice. We've been tinkering, asking ourselves, well, if this little girl takes the husband to court, who take care of her child or her children? Can she take her parents to court? Where would she live? Where would she stay? Who would provide for her if the assumed husband and the guardian or the caregiver is taken in by the courts? We cannot continue to accept violations and rape because the girls have no social protection or legal protection. The systems, our governments, our social services must ensure that we have protection for these children. This is why we say rape, child marriage is rape, and therefore the whole response around shelter, around violence against women must incorporate significantly the support that is needed to girls who dare to seek justice. So the first is the issue for justice. I know there are gray areas around children having sex among themselves and getting each other pregnant. Should the boy also be taken to court? I think there's juvenile justice in many countries. Let's look at that. Let's put more effort on it. Secondly is the issue of education. Education. And I know the second presenter following up is going to speak on education. Third is the underlying issue of poverty and economic security for girls. So we must address not only household poverty, but the macroeconomic environment that is creating household poverty. I know we have colleagues from Action Aid here who can speak to the issues of debt, and others who can speak to the issues around budgeting. So definitely we must address the macroeconomic framework just as much as we deal with household poverty. My last 2 points is changing social norms. It's not enough to just name that culture is bad. What is critical is what has been said by the Council of Traditional Leaders, that we must transform, we must move for the cultural leaders not to be perpetrators of violence, but to be protectors of our children. Therefore, let's scale up the positive innovations that we have, like the bylaws on ending child marriage, that we know a number of traditional leaders in Southern Africa especially, and also in Ethiopia, some religious leaders have been putting in place, and indeed celebrate Chieftainess Kachindamoto, who started this revolution within the traditional leaders with a first decree on ending child marriage. As Rosaria Memorial Trust, we partners who have been supporting it. Last 2 points is nothing about these girls, fully including them. The girls' agency in their own right is important. Their voice, their leadership, their innovations, they are part of the solutions. And lastly, it's about monitoring and accountability. Accountability is critical. Accountability to what is existing and accountability to what we commit ourselves. I want to invite you to join me in the next 3-4 months as I prepare my report as the African Union Goodwill Ambassador. I will be preparing my report for 2019 to 2020. As part of my accountability, I invite you to use that opportunity to be a reflective space for us to put our analysis together, and also as we put together some recommendations that can continue to give impetus into the African Union campaign to end child marriage, the extensive work of civil society in communities, and the individual work of champions who dare to challenge the norm. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Angela Ko, for the time and for all the co-hosts for this very important webinar. Indeed, happy International Women's Day, angry and sad as I continue to be. Thank you very much.
And happy International Women's Day to you too, Professor Dr. Nyaratzai. She chooses to challenge child marriage by requesting us, actually demanding us to call it what it is, rape, not marriage. And she presents a robust 6-point agenda for ending child marriage. I would like to suggest a 7th point, Dr. Nyaratzai, with your permission, and that is provide correct information and services for young girls who find themselves victims of child marriage, no, of child rape, so that they can achieve their reproductive rights, even as they are victims of this injustice. Thank you once again, Dr. Nyaratzai. And now I would like to turn to our next panelist, Mr. Wesley Chabwera, who is also from Southern Africa. He is the Executive Director of FAWE Malawi, and he's going to talk about access to education. Mr. Wesley Chabwera, you may have the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator. And yes, we all appreciate that evidence is there that educated women and education promotes healthier families and promotes women to participate in formal labor, but also the market, and earning high incomes and have fewer children, marry at a later age, and enable better health and education for their children, if they choose to do so. And there's huge evidence that education for women can uplift households, communities, but also nations out of poverty. However, we have seen that despite policies and strategies at Africa level, there are still gaps as regards access to education. And I want to highlight to you a few areas. The Continental Education Strategy for Africa 16-25, it highlights a few areas that are gaps. For example, the pre-primary enrollment generally is low. It is estimated at 20%, and we know that net enrollment for primary education is 80% due to the various strategies, the FR, the SDGs, but also free primary education policies. However, we do appreciate that most girls drop out in upper primary and do not complete primary education. And gross enrollment for secondary education is over 50%. And however, we know that access is still low for girls due to many reasons, and supply being overshadowed by demand from primary to secondary education. And access to higher education for girls is even far much worse. And we know that that is compounded even when it comes to science, engineering, technology, and mathematics for girls and women in tertiary education. Just to share with you a few statistics across Africa, UNESCO estimates that over 130 million girls between the age of 6 and 17 are out of school, over 15 million girls of primary school going age, half of them living in adversity in sub-Saharan Africa, will never enter into a classroom. And over 54 million out of school female adolescents are missing out on the chance to learn vital skills for work and survival. We do know that COVID has even impacted heavily on education. We know that COVID-19 has disrupted access to education due to the closures that have happened across Africa since last year. And learning for girls, especially in rural areas where technology is a big challenge, has been disproportionately disrupted. And this has bred inequality amongst communities, but also girls and boys. This is compounded by the fact that access to STEM across Africa is very low, and that's what we need to be worried about. We also have seen that COVID has perpetrated cases of gender-based violence, teen pregnancies, and child marriages, which have resulted in dropouts for girls in Africa. And these have escalated since the beginning of COVID-19. And COVID-19 has doubled the burden of girls and women in conflict and crisis situations. There are so many factors that have affected girls' education. For example, there are community factors. We know that in Africa, the attitude towards girls' education is negative. And there are negative cultural practices and beliefs in many communities across Africa that are affecting access to education. And poverty is also affecting our girls to access education and the care burden for girls and women. And we can't talk about the poor learning environment in schools, infrastructure, sanitation and hygiene, the competence of teachers to support girls to be able to improve their learning outcomes, but also access to school, the long distances they travel. And the previous speaker talked about gender-based violence, and we're talking about school-related gender-based violence, which has impacted on girls' access to education. And not forgetting the policy and broader factors that contribute to lack of access to education by girls and women, such as financing, but also we know that in some countries, some policies that are being implemented are not favoring girls, for example, on readmission of teen mothers into school. So what do we need to do? We need to challenge these. We are joining girls and women to challenge these barriers to be able to improve access to girls' education. I have a couple of points that I want to share, 6 points. I think today is a 6-point plan. So we need to challenge ourselves and give the platform and voice to girls and women to take to task governments across Africa to implement key commitments on access to education, namely the Maputo Protocol, Agenda 2063, the Sustainable Development Goals, including the Continental Education Strategy for Africa and the Gender Equality Strategy for the Continental Education Strategy for Africa. We need to challenge ourselves that girls and women should be at the center of development and implementation of laws, policies, and strategies that improve access to education across Africa. We all need to challenge ourselves to go for increased investment in education for girls and women in Africa. We need to challenge communities to prioritize girls' education, challenge harmful cultural practices that perpetrate marriages, teen pregnancies, and school-related gender-based violence. We need to challenge ourselves to improve access to education for girls and women in the face of COVID by making education accessible. COVID-19 will not stop our girls and women to access education. Finally, as a man, I am challenging fellow men and boys to change our attitude and support girls and women access education. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you very much.
Very, very well spoken, Mr. Chabwera, especially when you called on men and boys to join you in the challenge to improve access to quality education for girls. Thank you so much for highlighting the role of schools in protecting girls and also the role that schools can play in compromising safety of girls and women. Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to suggest a brief change in the program. We were meant to have Mrs. Evelyn Nyongesa, but I understand that Mrs. Leti Chiwara would like to go next because of unique challenges that she is having. Mrs. Leti Chiwara is gender expert and women's rights activist, and she's currently the UN Women representative to Ethiopia, the African Union, and the East and Central African region. Mrs. Chiwara, please take the floor, following which we shall ask Professor Sarah to make the remarks that she missed to make in the opening session on account of connectivity challenges. So we'll have Mrs. Leti Chiwara and then Professor Sarah Anyang going next. Thank you, Mrs. Chiwara. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Angela. Good afternoon, good morning to everybody. Let me join others in also starting by warmly wishing everybody happy International Women's Day. I'll focus my remarks this afternoon on the pandemic and the impact it has had not only on child marriages, but also broadly on women's poverty and women's leadership generally. And I'll say a few remarks at the beginning and of course also end with some recommendations of how do we move forward. the COVID-19 pandemic and the time we are living in now has had widespread gender and economic inequalities that we all know about. A study done by UN Women and UNDP in 2020 actually showed us that by 2021, around 435 million women and girls will be living on less than $1.90 per day, including 47 million pushed into poverty as a result of COVID-19. We have also seen the shift of funds to the pandemic response, resulting in hampering women's access not only to sexual and reproductive health and rights, but as the previous speaker has spoken about, access to education has been so much affected and therefore increasing the prevalence of early child marriage and gender-based violence. We have also seen violence against women in its various forms, increasing substantially throughout the past few years and particularly last year, simply because women and girls have been forced to live at home with the same people who are their abusers. And of course, with all the tensions that came with lockdowns and stay-at-home policies that were put in place by most African countries, it was very difficult and stressful for everybody. In the end, the brunt of that stress ended up on women and girls. The issue of care and the burden of care. More people have also, and particularly more women, have also had to take the burden of care and unpaid care work and domestic work. And more girls have literally been driving to some point of breaking point because of too much work on their hands. And all of us listening today, you will attest to this. There's just been too much to be done under very difficult circumstances. Having said so, this is also my 7 points. I will add 1 point to Dr. Nyarazai. My 7-point action plan. What do we need to do moving forward? My key message for today is women must be the architects and leaders, as well as the beneficiaries of all efforts to build back stronger and better in response to COVID-19 in Africa. We really need to place women at the center of designing what we need to do moving ahead as Africa. And we have the solutions, we can do it. Secondly, social and economic policies and programs to confront the fallout of the crisis must be inclusive and transformative, addressing women's leadership and labor, both inside and outside the home. The issue of women's leadership is so key because this year's Commission on the Status of Women is actually asking us to look at the role of women as leaders in our society. Therefore, we need to take that very seriously. Third, governments must ensure that health services continue to operate safely and that policies are in place and of course implemented to protect the sexual and reproductive health of women and girls. And I think many speakers before me have spoken to this point. Number 4, disaggregated data on COVID-19 are essential to fully understand the virus transmission, but also its impact on both women and men, boys and girls. Insights from this data will ensure that measures are put in place to reach those who are highly at risk and most marginalized. And in many instances, these are the women and girls in our communities. Number 5, women-owned enterprises and grassroots enterprises should need grants and other stimulus funding targeting them during this very difficult economic situation. We really need to ensure that the issue of poverty is addressed front and center, because it will be the litmus test of our success as Africa. But it will also empower women and girls to take control and to be able to stand their own and claim their rights and fight all the injustices that befall them in societies. Number 6, applying a gender lens in designing fiscal stimulus packages and social assistance programs is crucial for building a more prosperous, equal, and inclusive and resilient society. All our countries are going to begin these whole processes of stimulus packages and social assistance programs, and we need to ensure those are done by and with women at the center, as I said at the beginning. That's the only way that they'll be successful. Allow me to end by saying services for survivors of violence, including the girls who will have gone through early marriage, must be part of the pandemic response. We cannot afford to continue to expect them to fend for themselves and to look after themselves. We have to take action and provide adequate services for these survivors. Let me end my remarks once again by thanking the organizers for this amazing conversation, and thank all the speakers before me, because you've all said such amazing and important recommendations to take us forward. Thank you very much, Dr. Angela.
And thank you very much, Mrs. Chiwara, for such an amazing and articulate presentation. I would now like to turn over to Prof. Sarah Anyang, Commissioner for Human Resources at the African Union Commission, Commissioner for Human Resources, Science and Technology, and Vice Chairperson of FAWE Africa Board. Prof. Sarah, please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Happy International Women's Day. In my place, when we are having this occasion, we have a way we greet ourselves. We say, women, hey, and the response is, hey. Women, hey. 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 I stand on a existing protocol. I want to recognize the presence of excellencies present. I want to recognize the presence of Mr. Samuel Noga, the Director, Plan International, AU Liaison and Pan-African Office. I want to recognize the presence of Ms. Marie Evelyn Petrus Barry, the Regional Director, International Planned Parenthood Federation Africa Region. Ms. Achura Michael, the Young Human Rights and Gender Advocate Kenya. I want to recognize the presence of our Executive Director, Mrs. Mata Mweze, who is also the GMAC Chairperson. I want to recognize the esteemed guests, participants, the women of valor, women of virtue that we are celebrating today, our wives, our sisters, our mothers, our daughters. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Forum for African Women Educationalists, I would like to say that I am deeply honored to be present here today addressing you. For the benefit of those who may not be familiar with the Forum for African Women Educationalists that we commonly call FAWE, we are a Pan-African non-governmental organization founded in 1992 by 5 women ministers of education to promote girls and women's education in sub-Saharan Africa in line with education for all. Our mission is to work together with our partners to create positive societal attitudes, policies, and practices that promote equity for girls in terms of access, retention, performance, and education quality by influencing the transformation of education systems in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, it is yet another time of the year that we congregate and celebrate women's achievements and address barriers that reinforce inequality. This year's theme, Choose to Challenge, pushes to address these tremendous barriers that women and girls face in their quest for growth, empowerment, and self-independence. The discussions we are holding here today are geared towards voicing challenges that women face in accessing education, basic access to health services, ending child marriage, promoting a peaceful and tolerant culture, and traditional gender roles. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed women, today we are celebrating women at a time when the world is battling a pandemic, COVID-19. We have seen and experienced how the pandemic has spiked the violation of women and girls' rights, rising cases of teenage pregnancies, domestic violence, child labor, and child marriage. We have seen millions of children, among them girls, disconnect from schooling and learning, but even worse, witness how conventional barriers to girls' education have a multiplier effect in the face of a global crisis like COVID-19. As leaders, civil society, private sector, youth, academia, artists, among others, we hold a generational responsibility to challenge the gender disparities in the social, economic, cultural, and political spheres. We must stand firm in ensuring that the 9 million women, girls, UNESCO 2016 reports highlight as at risk of never attending school enjoy knowledge and skills that education harnesses in their lives. We must continue building a resilient African education system that promotes participation of women and girls in health sectors, particularly STEM, capacitates female teachers with the necessary digital skills to conduct online classes in pandemic situations, provide tailored education interventions to marginalized groups, and generally ensures gender inclusivity and responsiveness in all education initiatives. This is the vision of the African Union Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. An integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven by its own competent and skilled citizens able to play in the global arena. Today, I choose to challenge the status quo, and I choose to challenge you as women, you as daughters, that you need to rise above the stifling barriers that confiscate your freedom and liberation to excel, to achieve, and to contribute to the sustainability development of the Africa we want. The choice is ours to make. We either run with this or we choose to be killed by patriarchal, domineering attitudes. Today, as we mark a year since COVID-19 hit Africa, let us reflect on the past 1 year or so and critically assess the future that we might step into. We need sustainable solutions to improving the lives of marginalized girls and women. If we do not take action, walk the talk, and go beyond rhetoric, the casualties that we'll find will not be something that we want to stand by. But as women of conscience, as women of virtue, as women who have been put in place to hold the hands of those who are not capable to drive forward the vision of Agenda 2063 for an integrated society, then it is high time we started looking back and trying to mend the walls on the different ways that we have failed. As I conclude, I choose to challenge all the gender inequalities befalling our women from arid and semi-arid areas, urban centers, learning institutions, communities, and the corporate world. I encourage you to stand firm and call out whatever injustice in all forms and shape that belittle women's potential to be remunerated caregivers, leaders, innovators, employees, and job creators. Together, we make a difference. Together, we impact on our world. We are sisters, we are mothers, we are wives, we are friends, and we are visionaries. Thank you for listening, and happy International Women's Day.
And thank you so much for not leaving your energy behind this afternoon, Professor Sarah. I think you'll agree with me that this was a very rousing presentation. Thank you for articulating the needs of women and girls post-COVID and even in the past.
Thank you.
We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Great. One more presentation towards the end of this panel, this particular section. And as I invite our next and last speaker for this panel, I would like to remind you to put your questions and comments in the chat box. I already see 2 comments from Roslyn Wandaki in Kenya and from Mr. Edward Piri, and I would like the rest of you to feel free to voice your comments and thoughts in the chat box. At this point, then, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Mrs. Evelyn Nyongesa, who is Advocacy Advisor with the International Planned Parenthood Federation in Kenya. I guess Kenya, she will tell us where she is based. Welcome, Mrs. Nyongesa.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akol, for the invitation, distinguished guests and all panelists present, and all the participants, the activists, advocates from all over the region. I take this opportunity to wish you a happy International Women's Day. As my predecessors have spoken a lot, my intervention this afternoon is for us to challenge really how we can improve.
Mrs. Evelyn, Miss Evelyn, interpretation, yes. Please go to the French booth. You are interpreting in the English. Thank you so much. You can go ahead, Mrs. Evelyn.
Yeah, thank you. As I was saying, I wanted us to take a few minutes to reflect on this International Women's Day, how we can challenge to improve access to basic healthcare for young women and girls. All through the life course of the young women and girls, as we have read, we see them going through various experiences based on where they come from their economic background, whether they live in the rural areas or in urban areas, and even how they identify themselves as women and girls. And at IPPF, we recognize that diversity of women and girls is rich for us to leverage on, and that every woman and young girl has equal opportunity, so that for us to achieve gender equality, we must be able to address the healthcare needs of all these girls, regardless of where they come from and what resources they have available. I think it is incumbent upon us all to work together to improve healthcare for women and girls. As you have heard before, sexual and reproductive health is very important as we talk about young girls being able to access education, being able to access economic opportunities, because in their lifetime and across the region, we see girls faced with a myriad of challenges regarding their sexual and reproductive health. My predecessors, Mama Nyaradzai, has spoken about child marriage and the impact of this on women and girls. And this child marriage doesn't just come as a violence without any consequences. We are told that every year about 39 girls are given into marriage as child brides. And beyond that, we know there will be teenage pregnancies or early pregnancies, and even their life chances are diminished by this, because even the chances of survival of having childbirth at that age is very risky to their health. And yet this continues to happen in our continent. We need to challenge that. We also talk about female genital mutilation, and we see the numbers are dropping, but at a very slow pace, at an even rate across the country, the continent, and we also need to challenge this. We are told that between 2003 and 2018, there has just been a drop from about 35% to 23%. It tells us that we need to do a lot, and Plan and FAWE have spoken about the need to invest more in education. And this is the same for sexual and reproductive health and rights. Sometimes our young women and girls just need information about what they need to do when they're growing up. At 10 years, a girl will be asking the mother, so I had this period, what do I need to do? But we know across the continent, and based on the different experiences, that girls do not even get such basic information or even access to the sanitary towels that they need. And this puts them in further economic challenges and into some sexual risks that then have adverse impact on their sexual and reproductive health. We've talked a lot about adolescent pregnancy, and I cannot overemphasize what being able to access a contraceptive, how important it is to a young woman and girl. as a 19-year-old girl growing up, let me say 27 years ago, I was faced with this challenge of, so I find myself pregnant, and what do I do after that? Among the very few first girls who had gone to the university in my village, you can imagine the devastation of what a loss has happened to us, because this girl is going to drop out of school and is not even being able to help our community. But just because of being able to access information about where I can get a contraceptive method and be able to plan my future, I'm right here speaking to you on this auspicious occasion of the International Women's Day. And it is saddening that even in our day-to-day, this situation continues to happen. So many young girls need information, need services, but we say you're too young to access a contraceptive, you should be abstaining from sex. But the reality is not that, because we know that there are so many challenges that are pushing girls into getting pregnant. This could be through violence, through incidences of rape, violence at home, and even unconsensual sexual relations among young people themselves. And therefore, we as advocates and policymakers seated here, we really need to question how far or where are we going with regard to reducing teenage pregnancies. And this is also related to the remarks Dr. Akol made at the beginning, talking about the issue of unsafe abortion. And my predecessor also spoke about bringing those issues that we don't want to talk about in the open. I mean, unsafe abortion is a big issue that we are seeing across the continent. We are told 98% of all the unsafe abortions happen in Africa. And 44% of these unsafe abortions will be among girls who are aged 15 to 24 years. So you can imagine the risk at which our young people are. And so therefore the need for us to think more seriously about what can we do to increase access to basic healthcare. We've also seen the impact of COVID-19 on various sectors, and of course, sexual and reproductive health has not been spared. We have seen in our news in Kenya a story where a young girl shared that for her to be able to get access even to a bathroom, because she lives in a slum area and they share common rooms as bathrooms, she needed money, which her parents do not even have. And this forces her to engage in transactional sex just to be able to afford water and have a shower. This is a very basic need that we should not be talking about in this day and age. But you can see the stretch of vulnerability that this COVID-19 is pushing our young girls and women to. And there are so many other cases. And we cannot continue to just watch, but we need to do something about it. So from our experience as IPPF during this pandemic, we have seen a great shift of resources from the general healthcare service, including reproductive health, to focus on the pandemic. And this has had adverse effects like my predecessor spoke. But we have learned a lot of lessons from the experiences we've had in terms of provision of services. First of all, we realized that young girls and women who are in humanitarian situations are more adversely affected than any other girls out here. And therefore, they need to focus more attention on thinking more seriously about how do we address the sexual and reproductive health needs of the young girls and women in humanitarian situations who are living in refugee camps, because access to basic health services is not possible for them. We have also learned that as CSOs, we can also accelerate or reduce the gap in terms of service availability. And therefore, through our partners in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Mozambique, we've offered a lot of sexual and reproductive health services to populations or young women and girls in humanitarian situations. But all along, we realized that the policy framework is not as favorable for us to be able to provide these services. And the issue that is most neglected is the issue of access to gender-based violence services, for young girls and women who have survived rape and similar sexual violence experiences, because our health systems are not appropriately adapted to provide this kind of service. And we have been advocating for a comprehensive package of services to move from saying we need a minimal initial service package, but a package that will adequately address the needs, the sexual and reproductive health needs of young women in their diversity. And this could range from needing to have information, services like contraceptive services, even pregnancy tests, and that information they require, depending on the legal situation of the country. Are we able to provide safe abortion services and unsafe abortion? Because for women, this is a conversation that we have pushed under the carpet for too long, and yet this is a life-saving service. We have also noted that COVID-19 gave us the challenge to innovate, to be able to use technology to provide services to our young women and girls. But for those girls who are in humanitarian settings, this may not be possible. So it calls for greater effort and coordination of the different sectors to be able to look into, for example, what are the guidelines around technology? How do we facilitate the young girls and women in their different environments to be able to benefit from these advances in science to improve their sexual and reproductive health and rights? And I liked the way one young woman spoke about the need for us to talk more seriously about protection. Protection, not just the physical protection of women and girls from violence, but we have seen due to the pandemic, there's a lot of engagement on online spaces, and this is quite uncoordinated and unprotected, and therefore this also is an issue that we need to address. So as we move forward, and as I conclude, our recommendations as Planned Parenthood Global is calling for that we need to make these women in humanitarian situations more visible, because we don't get to hear about them. Can we hear their stories of what are their experiences, what are their challenges, and how can we make their life better by improving services to them? We have had a lot of talk about universal healthcare. Our Agenda 2063 talks about this, but for women in humanitarian situations, this is not possible because of that not being able to access the range of services that we have. And we've said when we talk about the SDGs and all these development commitments that we have, we need to be able to make sure that even in humanitarian situations, these are adequately addressed. And lastly, just to reiterate the need for us to prioritize comprehensive sexual and reproductive health care in humanitarian crisis, to be able to provide a full range of services that young women and girls need. So as I end, I'm calling on us as GMAC, as partners in development, to challenge, to give voice to these young women and girls in humanitarian situations, to come and share their stories with us and tell us what is working for them and what is not, as we continue to advocate for their policies and programs that work for them. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
And thank you very much, Mrs. Evelyn Nyongesa, for especially amplifying the needs of women and girls in humanitarian settings, and for calling on us to provide comprehensive sexual and reproductive health services, not forgetting safe abortion care within the broad framework of universal health care. I think, as you say, I agree, we've kept safe abortion care under the carpet for way too long. Thank you for re-emphasizing these important points. So at this point in our program, I would like to warmly recognize the presence of our Honorable Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs in Eswatini. He will also be the VIP in our closing session. Welcome, Honorable Polile Shakantu, and apologies in advance if I've murdered your name, representing His Excellency Senator Temba Masuku, who is the Deputy Prime Minister for the Kingdom of Eswatini. You're most welcome, and thank you for tuning in early to listen to some of the discussions that are being made here by our eminent panelists. Thank you so much. I hope you've been putting your comments in the chat box. I recognize 3 or 4. Please place your questions there. It is now time for us to respond to your questions and comments. And to do that, may I invite my colleague, Karen Dasa, to moderate the Q&A session. Karen?
Sorry, Dr. Angela. Karen is going to be the first contributor in the Q&A. She's bringing in the voices of the young women. Then you'll continue with the moderation. She's contributing.
Okay, welcome, Karen. Make your contribution at this point. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and happy Women's Day.
Welcome, Karen. We are listening.
Thank you, host. Happy International Women's Day from Cameroon. I'm Karen, and I've had amazing speakers before me. I've had the energy. I just want to continue with that same spirit. I want to bring the youth perspective. I want to bring in a lot of recommendations that as young women from the GMAC network, we brought together during our pre-CSW consultations. And I want to bring that contribution here. 25 years after Beijing, we still have we are making progress, but we are yet to attain gender equality, because still in our communities, still in our countries, women's rights are not still being respected. Women are being violated. We still have issues of rape. We still have issues of girls not going to school. We still have issues of child rights. And definitely, we need to accelerate the promises. 25 years later, 10 years after 1825, the landmark Declaration on the Right of Women, Peace and Security, and we still have less women in the peace table. We still have less women driving issues on peace and security. And also 5 years after 2250, the youth peace and security, we still have young people being excluded around issues of youth peace and security. And definitely, we are saying that we need actions, bold actions needs to be taken. So we are recommending that implementation of policy on zero tolerance of sexual and gender-based violence, which is very important, especially within a fragile humanitarian context, because we all understand that sexual violence has most of the time been used as a weapon of war on the women and the bodies of women. We also want the building and strengthening of solidarity amongst women, amongst activities. We also want to create the creation of peace against gender-based violence, early and forced marriages. For health, we want to ensure there will be a domestication of policies and establish a good implementation frameworks, including promoting digital advocacy for promoting sexual, reproductive, and human rights of women and girls. For education, we are recommending that continued promotion and sustained capacity building of young people to facilitate the implementation of policies and ensure that arts and culture and heritage are used to strengthen youth capacities. For governance, we are recommending that the active participation and leadership of youth in gender mainstreaming agenda and meaningfully engaging them in co-leading and co-creating solutions to development, governance, political dialogue, peace and security. Thank you very much. I hope you all are having an amazing time, and happy International Women's Day once more.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you for amplifying the voices of the young people at this session this afternoon. Right. I will just highlight some of the comments we've received. First, to start with Mr. Edward Piri, who says that culture is not bad and we should amplify the positive aspects of culture. I don't think anyone disagrees with you, Mr. Edward Piri. And I think the call is now to see how to actively promote culture, promote the rights of women and girls in Africa, using culture as a lever. We know that there are several positive cultures. Dr. Nyaradzai has highlighted, I think she called it the Nyanga. It's a cultural practice. And there are several others in Eastern Africa. Alternative rites of passage, Western Africa has its own attributes. And I think we should leverage these positive aspects positively to promote the rights of women and girls. So thank you for that. Roslyn Wandaki in Kenya highlights the impact that negative reproductive health outcomes have had on mental health. And I want to thank you for bringing up this neglected area. She mentions that we need to address stress and depression among teenage mothers and youth, especially those who find themselves victimized by a lack of protection on sexual and reproductive health issues. Thank you very much, Roslyn. Mental health is extremely important. It's highlighted in the SDGs as well. Another comment we have is from Mr. Woku, who recommends that the outcomes from today's session and from the International Women's Day all over celebrations, they need to be advocated and widely shared across the continent so that we can challenge all levels, from village level to challenging national laws and policies to challenging regional instruments that are either being implemented or not. And I thank you for that recommendation, Mr. Woku. Sabina Anoche says there is need for continuous gender sensitization programs in institutions, schools, communities, and domestic arenas. And of course, I cannot leave this session without mentioning Priscilla Aful's comment. She says that some societies in Africa hold their cultures in high esteem and cause some vulnerable girls not to achieve their dreams or their ambitions, not actualizing. I think she's highlighting the negative impact that culture can play, especially if culture is a closely held value in certain societies. Keep those comments coming in. I will mention them as we go. Please keep them coming, very interesting. Please feel free to challenge. Feel free to choose to challenge any of our speakers this afternoon. It's also allowed. It will generate very useful debate. So at this point, I'll turn over to the GMAC Secretariat, who will give us a session that will segue into our next panel. Over to you, Wudasi and colleagues. I believe at this point, and thank you for those, for all of you for staying with us up to now. At this point, we are expecting Ms. Andrew Patience with a spoken word presentation. Ms. Patience, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, and happy Women's Day to you. Please take the mic.
Happy Women's Day to everyone, and to all the distinguished speakers, participants, happy Women's Day to you all. So my name is Andrew Patience. I'm a poet, and I'm here to perform poetry and to also remind us of who we are as women, because we're powerful, and there's a possibility that real change happens in the world if we all do our part as women. So this piece is simply a reminder of who we are and of what we are not as well. And I hope that you do enjoy it. When the world tries to forget your name and history plays a distant chord, robbing your ancestors of their roots, remember your mother, the forging light that has shaped you into a warrior. Impervious to the sizzling tongue of prejudice, you are water. A tasteless necessity, needless of affirmations from broken miracles. Your body is the ancestral home for rituals. You believe you are a god, but a god no one knows or remembers, so you sock every rage in silence by becoming invincible. You join in their laughter and make jokes of your heritage because the world is too big an ocean to swallow. It troubles every famished memories of beginnings, so you let yourself drown. Only to awake to the nudges of your mother's voice, she says, you are beyond meaning, because definitions are omissions from the miracle called love. She wonders if you know identity shrinks the universe into a country and you another country. You are everything the world needs to breathe, so stamp your feet so hard on the ground. Let the universe attest to the raving power of your presence, a force beyond your body or the many shades of their naming, a bridge with no walls or boundaries that shuts you out. Read the letters of your name backward. Master your mother tongue and the languages of women before her. Your mother chose to challenge the politics that makes her bury her own children. Because society knows how to bake little girls. It molds us into fine pastries, the kinds ravaged by bandits and terrorists. And because a lifeless body's miracle is to be found, I pray ours won't be lost in the events of time, because society has sold us to the bidders of conflict and violence. But what is a little girl's prayer for home? So when next you say your name to the world, remember that you are another woman who dances with her body or prays with her eyes closed. And because gratitude isn't a God needing worship, you simply say hello and wait on the universe. You are another woman who gives her breast milk to men needing libations. You do not laugh with your chin hanging on your neck. You carve your lips in the dark, trace the map on your body into a street needing silence. You walk on voices, paddle your way through every mirroring effect of the paintings inside your eyes. You see a canvas, metamorphosing into a prison, a cell becoming the funeral home for the living. You hold your stare against the fierce image of your mother, begging you to remember all she never became. A tear drops in reckoning of all you are trying to escape. You are another woman trying to survive these wounds festering inside our bodies, a room full of carcasses feeding on others. Yesterday, a man asked you, where are you from? What is your accent? But how do you tell him to swallow his tongue and trace his way back to nowhere? So you said, you come from nowhere. You come from everywhere. You come from a long lineage of women who chose to challenge, and hoping that you too will do the same, because from challenge comes real change. Thank you very much.
And thank you. I'm tempted to clap. I don't know if anyone else feels inspired to clap. This is a beautiful, beautiful tribute to our unsung heroes, to our mothers, and to women everywhere who are striving to break free from little boxes that we've been placed into, who are asked, where do we come from? And yet in reality, we come from everywhere. Thank you very much, Ms. Patience, for that poem. It's very beautiful. I also want to backtrack a little bit and introduce Karen Dassa in another perspective. I've just been reminded by her colleague, Nicolene, that Ms. Dassa has just been elected in February, just last month, February 20th, as the General Coordinator for the Cameroon Women's Peace Movement. Congratulations, and keep breaking that glass ceiling, Karen. You have all our congratulations and encouragement.
Thank you very much.
What an excellent segue into the next panel, in which we have 4 panelists who will lead us along the theme, let's choose to change, to challenge gendered poverty in Africa. And the first panelist we have is Ms. Sitabile Dewa. Ms. Sitabile Dewa is the director for the Women's Academy for Political Excellence, and she will take the floor now with her brief presentation. Welcome, Mrs. Dewa.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Someone muted my video from the organizers. May you please switch it on?
You are on, we can see you.
Oh, okay. I can't see from this side. No, that's fine. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the organizers for organizing such an important platform as we commemorate the International Women's Day 2021 under the theme hashtag Choose to Challenge. My topic is let's choose to challenge the discriminatory gender roles to realize women and girls' economic empowerment. I'm going to center on 5 key points that continue to inhibit women and girls from realizing their full potential in terms of economic emancipation and empowerment. The first point remains the issue of patriarchy. Patriarchy remains one of the biggest stumbling block to women's economic participation, as most women are struggling across Africa to put food on the table. With the advent of COVID-19, the situation is actually going out of control, and there isn't much that is being done by governments to make sure that women and girls are catered for. We have so many women who are trying to make it in the leadership and economic sector, but because of patriarchy, they have to seek permission, most of the women, from their male counterparts. And when these women do tend to succeed, they have to balance between the domestic community and national responsibilities in terms of promoting their economic participation. You find women have to put hands and feet everywhere, that making it very difficult for them to succeed economically. I want to touch on the issue of socialization. How, as an African continent, we continue to move backwards instead of forward in terms of modernizing our way of doing things. Right now, we have old curriculums in most schools that do perpetuate the current discriminatory behaviors and social norms that continue to sideline women and girls in owning the levers of the economy. I want to also touch on the current challenges that have been caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. We have now women doing a lot of work, homeschooling, where you find women have to catch up on their work. They have to also make sure that their children are catered for and they do their work. That is, if they can afford to have online learning. We have children that are lagging behind girl child in terms of being part of the online learning, because technology is not something that you can find easily in Africa. So in terms of challenging, I want to challenge civil society organizations and other various stakeholders to continue to engage our member states to make sure that they promote and prioritize the issue of technology going forward, because it is going to take years for the girl child to kind of like catch up with others because of so many inhibiting factors. I want to touch to the issue of our formalized economies. About 80% of most African economies are very informal, and 75% of those who you find in the informal sector are women. And during the COVID-19 era, you would see in most countries the informal sector was closed and it wasn't allowed to operate as an essential service. So you would find women now stuck at home with nothing to feed the children, further exacerbating the level of poverty you find in women, both in the urban and in the rural areas. So in terms of choosing to challenge, let's challenge our different countries to formalize the economy, because if women could work in a formal environment, they'll be able to access credits and loans to make sure that they boost and recover from the current mess that COVID-19 is instilled upon our communities. I want to touch on the burden of unpaid care as my fourth point, the burden of unpaid care and domestic work on women. If you check with the advent of COVID-19, about 75% of the world's total unpaid care work is performed by women. This is from cleaning the house, taking care of the sick, firewood collection. Right now, another new burden of taking care of COVID-19 patients with no techniques or skills or experience whatsoever. whatsoever. Our governments have not done much in terms of raising awareness on the young women with disabilities and young girls to take care of COVID-19 patients. So you find women being now burdened with the responsibility to take care on home-based care, something that we did not even know how to do it before. Yet men get excused to do other productive things within the communities. So it is also upon us as women leaders to make sure when we are doing our programming to mainstream men, boys, and men with disabilities, to make sure they understand the negative implications of unpaid care and domestic work on women and girls. I want to touch on my last point, which is most women in Africa, they occupy low-level leadership positions. So with the advent of COVID-19, most of the work is being done virtually. And you find women have little skills in terms of catching up on the Zoom meetings, on the Teams, on submitting things, and even those in the informal sector. They're really finding it difficult to submit whatever that they are selling online. Yet men are able to do that. So this is something that our governments really need to consider and make sure that they incorporate and do retrainings for women, especially those who occupy low-level and middle-level jobs, so that they'll be able to catch up and also help with easing of doing duties and responsibilities, as they also have the responsibility to take care of the family at the family level. I also want to touch on the issue of access to land and issues of inheritance. Most of our economies in Africa are agri-based, but very few women own land. We have had countries that have had the land reform program, but very few women own land and are able to access bank loans to be able to borrow and make sure that they use their arable land to maximum. But the challenge now is, as women, we really need to continue to push so that women can actually own land. It is said that right now we see our laws are actually going back in other countries in terms of women's rights to inheritance. So as we move forward, we really need to make sure that we push back the pushbacks and make sure that women are visible, women given the necessary support for them to excel in leadership and economic opportunities. And lastly, I feel that we really have, there is lack of political will, especially on our leaders, to make sure that women meaningfully participate in the economic processes of the country. Issues of corruption, illicit financial flows, lack of transparency and accountability are gendered in Africa, and they tend to be perpetrated more by men, but unfortunately they have a negative bearing on women and girls. And in terms of my concluding remarks and recommendations to the African Union, the first recommendation is there is need for the African women to organize with member states to make sure that they provide the necessary IT skills, techniques, and means for women to also catch up and contribute to these discussions that we are currently having, especially women in rural areas. Data is very expensive in Africa. The smartphones are very expensive. Can there be mechanisms that are put to make sure that women can access those gadgets and platforms so that they'll be able to meaningfully contribute to the economy? The second contribution is on unpaid care and domestic work. I would want to appeal to the African Union to encourage member states to set up specific targets on increased investment in care-related infrastructure and services, such as the Abuja Declaration, where 15% of budgets are supposed to be set aside for health. And lastly, the African Union should convene an expert meeting from civil society, government, African Development Bank, academic institutions, and the African Union to look at the strengthening civil society organizations and partnerships to scale up approaches on unpaid care and domestic work as an economic development and policy issue. Thank you very much once again to the organizers and the facilitator. Back to you.
And thank you very much, Ms. Dewa, for eloquently presenting a 5-point agenda for challenging gendered poverty in Africa: access to technology, access to formal work and pay, and access to credit, land rights, and so on and so forth. Next on the panel is Ms. Constance Okeke. from Action Aid Global Secretariat, and she works in Action Aid as the International Project Manager for Public Finance for Agriculture. She is a passionate female developmental worker. She's a female and she works for women, whose passion is to develop institutional capacities to support sustainable livelihoods among the most marginalized in Africa. Constance, please take the mic.
Thank you, Dr. Angela, for giving me this opportunity. And I want to also thank GMAG and partners for creating this platform for us to join to challenge the status quo so that women empowerment can be promoted. Happy Women's Day to everybody and to all the men that are standing up for the women. I'll join my voice to what the last speaker has said, but I would like to take it from a little bit different angle. And I would like to start with sharing some key facts, which has been repeated by maybe some of the presenters. We all agree that women make enormous contributions to our economies in different forms, be it in the businesses, be it on the farms or employees, or even doing the unpaid care work at home. So any deliberate investment in women's economic empowerment would definitely set us on the right path to gender equality, poverty eradication, and inclusive growth. But despite this, the women, that's the female gender, still remains largely affected by poverty and discrimination and exploitation. We also know that most times women end up in the insecure low-wage jobs, and they constitute a smaller minority of those in the senior positions. And also this discrimination leads to them having limited access to economic assets, just like our last speaker said, to land, credit, and other resources that are necessary for livelihoods. It also limits their participation in shaping our economy and social policies. And because they perform the bulk of the household work, they are often left with little time to pursue economic opportunities. But then, why do we need economic empowerment for women and girls? First and foremost, it's to fulfill their rights and protect their rights as women, and also to ensure gender equality. And because when you empower and build economic empowerment of women, it will also help them access and control land and other productive resources. They will be able to access decent work and have control over their time, their lives, and their bodies. They will also have increased voice and agency and meaningful participation in economic decision-making spaces at the different levels, like the kind of work we do through the Action Aid work, where we mobilize women farmers to be able to engage policies that affect agriculture financing, where they track and monitor budgets, where they try to participate in budgeting processes. But this cannot be done if they're not given that opportunity and the spaces are not provided. Another reason why we need economic empowerment for women and girls is that it will help us achieve the all agreed sustainable development goals. Is it the goal 5 that is talking about gender equality, or the goal 8 that is promoting full and productive employment and decent work for all? Or is it the ending poverty goal, or the food security goal, or reducing inequalities? It's a whole hog of goals that this can help us, achieve. And like I already said, it will help us have inclusive economic growth. So what changes are we seeking to, challenge? We believe that our existing economic systems are dramatically failing people and the planet, where you have dominant economic institutions, patriarchal hierarchies like my colleagues have just talked about, and also corporations having to always exploit the different crises, and more currently the COVID pandemic, to further advance their agenda. And at the end of the day, the women and the young and the girls have to bear most of this, because they're already facing multiple forms of discrimination that is based on their race, their class, their age, their sexual orientation, their identity, and all whatnot. But then you can't rule out the issues of the austerity that have really, cut out the roles of the state through cost to public services, social protection, and then leaving these women to bear the burden through their unpaid care work and domestic work. You will not relieve out the women working in vital public spaces like the health sector, the education, who remain underpaid with poor working conditions. And as much as the thousands of women working in the agricultural and other sectors like the garment sectors, who are also, who working in an environmentally damaging and also climate damaging situations without anybody taking care of their issues. We believe that if the public services that are always absent or at times inadequate is not being tackled, we're going to have a problem. We also need to exit from the economic models that exploit and exacerbate women's economic and social and political exclusions, that pollutes and destroys our environment, displacing our communities, incessant insecurities all over. Farmers cannot go to the farm. We are not even sure about our food. And then, the humanitarian crisis that is, rampaging the whole global African system and also condemning our future generations. The young girls are not even left out because they are impacted more due to their age and reproductive roles. So what needs to be done? The African Union and other governments should ensure that countries have physical and policy space to increase public spending on public goods and services, which includes public financing for agriculture, by reversing austerity policies imposed by international financial institutions, among others. Redistributing women's unpaid care work by massively scaling up investment in gender-responsive public services like food, health, education, care, gender-based violence, extension services, and the rest, to ensure that it includes informal economy workers who are mostly women. There is need for us to transform the unjust and corporate controlled production and consumption systems, as well as the food systems that will both exploit the women, paid and unpaid care work, and also degrade our environment. We need to also make use of the current biannual review processes that African Union has introduced to take stock of the progress of agriculture transformation, and especially, and creating enabling environment through gendered policies, partnerships, resourcing, and other measures to accelerate progress towards 2025 Malabo Declaration goals. And this can also be done by introducing the gender biannual review indicators that will help us measure clearly and articulately how these processes have impacted on women. There's also need to ensure that women and their organizations are in leadership of the decision-making, implementation of the different empowerment programs, and most especially the COVID-19 and recovery policies, and that their knowledge and expertise and experiences are prioritized as the most excessively affected and in the front line of defending rights and responding to crisis. And in my conclusion, I still want to reiterate that women and girls do not need rescue packages at all. All they need is power to drive their lives. They actually need a place at the table. And this can be provided, and this should be provided. This must be provided for us to have women economic empowerment and equality. Thank you.
Thank you, Constance. Thank you for introducing agriculture into this discourse. Africa is an agricultural continent, and 80% of the work is done by women. So there's no way we can choose to challenge the unfair access to women's rights without challenging unfair policies around agriculture and agriculture financing. I also want to invite you to engage with groups like IPPF and IPAS and other health groups to examine the intersections between agriculture and women's health, because there are synergies across the board. But thank you so much for highlighting how agriculture is important to this discourse.
Thank you.
At this point, let's invite together His Majesty Mfumu Difuma, who will bring a slightly different trajectory to the discussion. His Majesty Mfumu comes from the Great Congo Customary, he's a Great Congo Customary Chief, President of the Union of African Traditional Authorities. And an important piece of information about him: he is a member of the National Land Reform Commission and an official partner of the UN Women in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Thank you so much for joining the discussion. His Majesty Mfumu Difuma, please take the microphone.
Oui, ça va là, on m'écoute? Allô, oui, bonjour. Je salue tout le monde. Je voudrais me rassurer que le son est en train de passer. Allô? Est-ce que m'entend là?
Yes, we can hear you, Your Majesty. Translation is what?
Ok, merci. Merci beaucoup. Vous verrez que
Hi, we at Untitled News would
monsieur
like to wish you
revenu
a happy
rapidement dans le
International
véhicule parce
Women's
que
Day.
nous sommes
Let's
à une
join
grande
hands in
activité de la
empowering
journée
girls
de
to
la
become
femme
change
aujourd'hui, le
makers
8,
in our society.
où les femmes de la RDC viennent de mettre en place la mutuelle à ce que la femme se retrouve. Et donc ici, je voudrais avant tout remercier Jimac
We at Untitled News would like
pour
to
le
wish
grand
you a
travail
happy
qu'il est
International
en train d'abattre,
Hi.
qui est celle de replacer la femme dans sa vraie
We at
valeur ou
Untitled
dans
News would
ce
like
qu'on
to
appelle
wish
ce
you a
droit.
happy International
Je
Women's
voudrais
Day.
remercier
Let's
ici
join
l'ONU
hands.
Femmes Afrique qui nous a associés depuis quelques années à nous battre pour discuter ensemble avec eux des préoccupations qu'ils ont de la femme et des préoccupations que nous avons de ce que je peux appeler les droits, devoirs et obligations de la femme. Et aussi voir par rapport à tout ce qu'on peut appeler les outils internationaux, quel est l'apport et donné au niveau de préoccupation de la femme. Je voudrais également remercier Oxfam, Union des autorités traditionnelles d'Afrique, et président du Conseil supérieur de l'autorité traditionnelle RDC. Ici, je voudrais profiter de l'occasion pour donner une image. L'image, c'est laquelle? C'est celle de dire, quand nous parlons aujourd'hui de la journée de la femme, je voudrais du droit de l'historique même de ce qu'on peut apporter à la femme aujourd'hui, c'est l'encourager. Le son, est-ce que là, vous m'entendez? Là, ça passe bien? Allô? Ça passe bien là?
Yes, that is much better.
Oui, je
Thank
vois qu'on
you.
est dans un milieu, le chef de l'État, dans une grande activité, certainement. Mais je prends rapidement de l'espace dans les 10 minutes qui me sont accordées pour vite donner un avis. Et en fait, comme je disais, c'est vous remercier vraiment de cette opportunité. Mais je suis en train de dire, quand on parle de la révalorisation de la femme, ça veut dire la révalorisation ou la réhabilitation, c'est quelqu'un qui avait une valeur ou qui l'a perdu, qu'on doit renouveler, qu'on doit rénover, réhabiliter. Et c'est dans ce sens que nous comprenons le problème de la femme aujourd'hui. Parce que vous allez remonter l'histoire de la culture de la femme africaine, vous vous rendrez compte que même dans...
In the African context, we're going to see that in the past, it is the African woman who was taking care of things. They were everywhere. When it comes to monument, if you go to monuments in Egypt, you will see women were playing a huge role because women are the ones who give life. They are the ones who train. They are always educating, the educators from the very young age. And this is across the world. They have the capacity to do this. The sound is gone, it's off again. I'm sorry.
Sur l'épargne, vous pouvez vous rendre compte que est toujours celle qui...
When it comes to the issue of savings, women always have this opportunity. They can help the society to move forward. So I think after having been with the women, after trying to fight the issue of violence, early marriages, to allow women to take their to play their role, and I think that we should also try to help them because the savings were always a feminine domain. So today we are talking about protecting the economies of families and of countries. Before, women who had not studied, but they had been organized and they took care of the economies of their countries because they are taking care. But when we go to these women cooperative societies, when we want to fund agriculture, in order to fund the artisanal sector, we have to always take into consideration woman who is there. And this is what I would like to recommend. If we want in this world where competition is really, really high, we have to ensure that women can play their role. If you go to the countryside, everything is about agriculture. Who are the main agriculturalists? It's women, it's men. But there are more women who are farmers, and we need to invest more and to ensure that our investments target women. We have to renovate all our sectors where women are playing the role of the majority. We have to ensure that they are there. And I don't think that we are doing the right thing. And as a traditional authority, we have to do everything to ensure that women have access to land, communities have access to land. And this should be based on the honor of women. And we are seeing that women are not benefiting from all funds which are coming from bilateral partners, multilateral partners. We have to put in place commission, a funding commission, because UN Women is trying to push to ensure that women are involved in everything, and we have to ensure that we protect these women. And we have to know that women have access to they must have access to land, they must have access to everything,
1 minute to
productive
go.
resources. And we have to think together to see how we can ensure that women who have always played a huge role in savings and so forth, how can we ensure that they can come back and continue playing their role? They have access. They are, some of them are poor, they cannot do it, but the woman can always say, how can we allow women to play their role? How can we ensure that they are back and they are doing what we need in order for us to move forward together, in order for us to move Africa forward? This is what I can tell you in the 10 minutes that you gave me. Thank you. So, happy International Women's Day to all our mothers. When we talk about education, maternal education, everything, women who have been supporting us, I would like to wish them a great day, a great festival, because this is a day that we consider as a day where we are going to reconsider the role of women in a positive manner in order women to allow us to push our countries forward. Communities can do nothing without women, and women need their rights. And women are the ones who create us and they give us, and our authority is available to ensure that women take their roles, and we have to ensure that we take care of the well-being of women, and our organization is ready and is ready to allow us, and UN is working with us to ensure that we can reorganize the traditional authority across the continent in order to ensure that we are together, in order to ensure that women have a better environment. In the last minute, I would like to tell you that when you talk about women, you are talking about women who have studied, and there are some levels that we have to put in place. When it comes to agriculture, women is there. Women is there.
So thank you very much, Your Majesty. I'm afraid we'll have to cut short
Je voudrais aussi demander
your
à la
submission.
place, si vous permettez une minute, à la place d'encourager ce qu'on peut appeler les
Can allow me for 1 minute. It is women who, secondary schools which are promoting women, colleges which are promoting women, and there is a competition in schools, and this competition is going to continue in secondary school, in high school, in senior high school, and you're going to see that we are going to realize this equity and equality much faster. Thank you for the 10 minutes you accorded me.
Thank you most kindly, Your Majesty. Your presentation, unfortunately, and we apologize for the poor sound. We lost a bit of it, and I apologize for having to curtail you. But you raise one thing that we take away is that nothing can happen without us engaging with traditional societies. Thank you for echoing very eloquently the words of Dr. Nyaradzai in the first panel, that we need to engage with our traditional systems in trying to challenge the status quo. Thank you very much for highlighting education and agriculture and access to finance as some of the things that we need to engage with traditional associations on. Our last speaker on this panel is going to be Dr. Tapiwa Uchizi Nyasulu Reyemamu, who is the head of gender analysis and monitoring in the Women, Gender and Development Directorate at the Africa Union Commission. And she is speaking on behalf of Mrs. Victoria Maloka, who is the director in the same division. Please welcome Dr. Tapiwa, who has over 15 years of progressive experience in gender mainstreaming, anti-corruption and social development, among many other areas of development. Dr. Tapiwa, please go ahead with your presentation. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Angela. And all protocols observed. Greetings, everyone, from the political capital of the African Union, that's Addis Ababa. And I'm glad to be here. And I really thank GMAC for inviting the Women, Gender and Youth Directorate to be part of this celebratory moment that we're witnessing in 2021 of the International Women's Day. And as mentioned, indeed, I'll be presenting on behalf of my acting director, who could not join us due to some family emergency issues. Well, happy International Women's Day to each one of us. Of course, I'll be speaking in line with what I was tasked to do on advancing the rights of women and girls in Africa, and more especially situating my presentation on how AU and member states can tackle gender poverty in Africa and shift discriminatory social norms, including unpaid care work towards women economic empowerment. Well, on the onset, allow me to mention that as we celebrated, of course, Africa's achievements during the 10 years of the first decade of the African woman, that spanned from 2010 to 2020, and the 20 years of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, and the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and its platform for action. We also deplore the regression of our gender gains following the COVID-19 pandemic. Among other things, we have seen how this pandemic has contributed to the sharp increase in violence against women and girls, as mentioned by other speakers before me, and also affected many African economies where African women and girls operate, which in turn has exacerbated deep structural injustices, inequalities, and poverty on our continent. The evidence, of course, is mounting that the economic impacts of COVID-19 has hit women very harder, hence exacerbating poverty, in particular in gendered poverty. 74% of the women in Africa are engaged in the informal economy, working as nannies, street vendors, or domestic workers. In these jobs, access to social security, health insurance, or entitlement to sick leave are usually not provided. As such, women are less likely than men to be able to rely on a safety net in a particular jurisdiction. In the formal economy too, we have seen that women are more at risk than men to lose employment. On one hand, women are often active in the areas of work that are the first to fall away in economic crises. For instance, they are overrepresented in the service, tourism, and hospitality industries that is being strongly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak. On the other hand, increasing caregiving responsibilities, among other factors, due to we've seen quite a number of quarantine measures and closures of school, has a differential effect on women economically. Given their role in providing most of the informal care within families, they are obliged in many cases to give up work to take care of the children who are out of school and therefore impacting their levels of income. The COVID-19 crisis has implications for the supply of women's labor to the market as well, the market economy. For example, due to the increase in care work, that's because of the schools closure, women reallocate their labor from market to care activities. The restrictions on mobility due to quarantine and similar measures affect both women and men and affect households' resources and women's participation in the workforce, which has reduced due to illnesses. On the labor demand side, orders to close certain businesses such as restaurants, personal care services, non-essential retail due to COVID-19 have reduced demand for paid workers, predominantly in service sector jobs, where larger shares of women do work. Quarantine and public health measures have an adverse effect on informal workers and small-scale enterprises. For example, the livelihood of street vendors is threatened by measures to maintain social distancing. These factors, of course, have a long-term consequences for women's economic and social empowerment, as we saw during the Ebola outbreak, which demonstrated that when women have to give up work during times of crises, they will be confronted with more challenges than men when trying to spring back after the crisis. Furthermore, as they risk losing their jobs, women might have to take up an informal but highly dangerous jobs or exposed to transactional sex for food. Women also comprise much of the smallholder farming sector. I think this is something that has already been mentioned by a previous speaker. Travel restrictions and closure of small agricultural enterprises have reduced the availability of employment opportunities for millions of small-scale traders, who are often predominantly women and girls. Again, we can learn from the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, where women's economic security was adversely affected due to travel restriction. Delay in delivery of goods owing to travel restrictions and increase in transport fares have negatively affected the business of these women and their economic security. Again, I would also want to mention one sector of women that we know that have been heavily affected are the migrant domestic workers, who often are women and are likely and are strongly suffering from the impact of COVID-19. We've received reports for hundreds of African women migrant workers in the Middle East being deported and more face deportation with serious human rights implications. Migrant workers face regularly unequal power relations with the employers and often do not possess any identification documents. Finally, the instances of female domestic workers being denied to access healthcare and COVID-19 testing as they did not have any identification of documents and are having to pay heavy fines for undocumented stays in the host country when needed to living amidst lockdown measures have been reported. The impact of the deportations will also be seen after the pandemic is over. The remitter says as well that families rely on will be disrupted and can cause serious socioeconomic struggles. Let me come to what the AU and member states ought to do, or we're advising them to do from the Secretariat. As you know, the African Union Commission is a secretariat to the AU as well as the member states. So we play the advisory role as it stands, and it's also facilitating and supporting the implementation of some of these instruments and policies put in place. One way, as you can see in our African continent, which is developing at high speed and at all levels, it is clear that the importance attached to women's role and place is very, very fundamental. As a lever of change and order of the world record for women's entrepreneurship, our continent is not left behind when it comes to promoting women's rights and equality between men and women. As such, the member states should continue supporting women and girls through the Fund for African Women. At this point in time, let me highlight that, well, this fund is being redesigned into a trust fund. So we hope that, well, the member states will continue doing that, because we know that through the Fund for African Women, which started in 2010, has contributed immensely in empowering, empowering women's economic position in the countries. Also, member states ought to implement the newly adopted African Women's Decade on Financial and Economic Inclusion, which was adopted in 2020 rather. And as you know, in 2020, during the African Union Assembly, the heads of state and government, they adopted this new decade. and which reflects the continent's determination to strengthen efforts and mechanism towards the full implementation of women essential for sustainable development of our countries. We firmly believe that this new decade will fill the gaps and bring economic and financial justice to African women and girls. Currently, we are in the process of developing a roadmap that will help in terms of the implementation of this decade. And obviously, it's our roadmap where we want to realize and achieve full potential of African women's and girls' economic empowerment. Thirdly, of course, is to make sure that the member states do realign the newly adopted AU strategy on gender equality and women's empowerment, where one of the 4 pillars, of course, talks about maximizing opportunities and outcomes and dividends. And this, of course, it emphasizes on women's economic empowerment and paid care work. It was launched last week during the ministerial consultation in preparation for the pre-CSW 65. So we hope that, well, that's something that will be able to take it up by member states and all other stakeholders involved in order to empower economically the women and girls out there. Fourthly,
a minute, please.
Yes, I hear you, Dr. Angela. Fourthly, the member states, of course, we're looking at it where they should be in a position to recognize and value unpaid care and domestic work through the provision of public services, infrastructure, and social protection policies, and the promotion of shared responsibility within the household and the family in achieving gender equality and women empowerment for all women and girls. The full participation and decision-making processes that will be aligned and agreed in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Agenda 2063. Last but not least, let me highlight the work where our member states are expected, and we're supporting them in promoting and implementing the proposed AU protocol on 30% preferential procurement for women-owned businesses, as well as the proposed AU Women in Trade protocol as part of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Lastly, of course, for our member states to develop and as AU Secretary, we're helping them to develop targeted economic empowerment strategies and social protection measures, such as exploring cash transfer programming to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 outbreaks, including support for populations who are employed during the public health emergencies, who could lose their revenue stream once the outbreak is contained, and for communities to recover and build resilience against future shocks. So in short, that's what I wanted to highlight in terms of what is expected, and we're supporting our member states in terms of implementing these key actions so that women and girls are economically empowered out there. So happy International Women's Day once again to all of us.
And thank you for honoring us with your presentation, Dr. Tapiwa. Happy International Women's Day to you too. And Dr. Tapiwa's presentation brings us to the end of this panel, which was on Let's Choose to Challenge Gendered Poverty in Africa. And she highlighted an unseen portion of women on this continent. Those are the migrant female domestic workers who very often are left out in our programs and policies. And she also highlighted the African Union's interventions in social protection for women-owned businesses, and was talking about women's engagement in policies. And then we went to Mrs. Constance Okeke, who talked about agricultural finance for women in development. His Majesty Mfumu Difima talked about the role of traditional institutions in uplifting women in all sectors. And lastly, Dr. Tapiwa has just highlighted the need for social protection across the continent in trade, in agriculture, and in all sectors of development. I would now like to highlight the next steps. One is that we shall do a Q&A session, and then Karen Dasa will come back to amplify the voices of young people as she wraps up the next steps and way forward, for which we shall have the closing remarks from Honorable Polile Shakanto, Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs in the Kingdom of Eswatini. Right, so at this point, I would like to invite you to put your questions and comments in the chat box. And as we begin, may I highlight a comment from Sabina Anoche, who talks about clean energy sources. And as I have listened the entire afternoon, I think this comment highlights best where we need to address in terms of the climate discussion. We have touched on it here and there, but we have not come out explicitly to talk about the intersection of women's rights and climate and how unclean sources of energy might impact on women's rights, women's health, and time to engage in economically productive activity. So she calls on the African Union to partner with civil society organizations and other organized energy in Africa. Nicoline from Cameroon also calls on civil society organizations to take advantage of the gap in policy discussions. She says a lot of civil society organizations restrict themselves to humanitarian and development work and have less intervention in the policy arena, and calls on us to challenge ourselves to fill that gap. Right. Do we have any other questions
We have
and
hands
comments?
up, Dr. Angela,
Secretary?
from our attendees end, if we can give at least two. We have...
Yes, I can't see the hand, so
Uche?
please. Uche, please go ahead.
Yes, please go ahead. We have unmuted your mic, so you can proceed.
Uche?
I think we lost Uche. So if there are any attendees who would like to comment at this moment, please raise your hands so we can give you the space.
Whilst we are waiting for the hands, Dr. Angela, can I ask Karen, the young GMAC woman, to just echo a few sentiments in this session? 2 minutes, Karen.
Yes, please go ahead, Karen.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And I want to agree with all the speakers, and I want to talk based on my view as a young activist. And I want us to talk about issues around leadership that entails young women taking up leadership roles. I know that especially within the African context and some of the countries that we come from, we always hear issues around youth are the leaders of tomorrow. And later, tomorrow is infinite. We don't know the tomorrow we're all looking forward to. So this is to say that in as much as we are young, in as much as we are young women, we are youth, we are the leaders of now, because we have the abilities to lead. Sorry about that. Okay, so we want to encourage that young women should take up leadership positions. We want to challenge young women to do that. Not only leadership, but in leadership in the political spheres, in the health sector, in governance structure, in the educational institutions. We want to challenge young women to avoid the syndrome of always staying at the back, and also encourage our mothers, our leaders to look at us not as enemies, but as partners. Through mentorship, we are able to deliver, and we are up to the task to sit on the table. We are up to the task to be where decision-making processes are concerning us are being made. And that is very important, and it is critical. With the Generation Equality campaign coming up, we want to ensure that young people in all their diversity have a place to talk about their issues, to make decisions that will affect them directly, and not only being beneficiaries to these decisions. I really want to flag that, and thank you so very much for honoring our invitation. And I want to appreciate the speakers that spoke before me. Thank you all for your time, and I think that on my end, I just wanted to flag that aspect of youth leadership, especially young women. This is a challenge. Thank you very, very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you for highlighting the need for mentorship and guidance among the youth in Africa to take up leadership positions. I want to note that there are no hands up, which can mean two things. It can either mean that the session was overwhelming and that people are exhausted, but I don't want to believe that, because personally it's been energizing for me. And so the second option is likely to be true, that everything was clear and all the panelists excelled. Uche, are you making a contribution? Your name is on the screen.
No, we don't have any hands up and no contribution.
All right. Okay. So at this point in time, I would like us to prepare for the closing ceremony. And as we do that, to ask the Secretariat to wrap up with a summary of the next steps and way forward from this afternoon session. Anyone in the Secretariat? Is there a summary written down of key recommendations coming out of the sessions?
Sorry, Dr. Angela, we are getting those from our rapporteur, but what we'll do is we're going to share the draft with all speakers and all participants to just share some of the points which we might have missed from today. Just looking at our time, would really like you to move to the closing, since we have Honorable Minister who has joined us from the start.
Hi,
so
we at Untitled News would like to wish you a happy International Women's Day.
So with those
Let's join
remarks,
hands
it is
in
now
empowering
my
girls to become change
absolute
makers in our
honor and
society.
pleasure to invite Honorable
Let's join
Minister
hands in
Polile Shakantu, Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs in the Kingdom of Eswatini, representing His Excellency Senator Temba Masuku, who is the Deputy Prime Minister in the Kingdom of Eswatini. Honorable Polile, thank you so much for sitting in and listening in on the discussions, and I would now like to turn it over to you to make your closing remarks. And after she has made her closing remarks, I will not say much, because in Africa, as you all know, once the big drum speaks, the small ones keep silent. So I would like to also thank you all for the attention this afternoon, for your participation, for your active discussion, and to thank the panelists for your educative presentations, for being knowledgeable and concise and to the point. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, GMAC, for the opportunity. Honorable.
Thank you, Dr. Angela, for the warm introduction. May I start by honoring and greeting His Majesty King Mfumu Difima, Great Congo Customary Chief and President of the Union of African Traditional Authorities. May I also recognize His Excellency Amira El Fadil, Commissioner for Social Affairs, African Union Commission, who was represented by Ms. Sisi Mariam Mohammed, AUC, DSA, Mrs. Leti Chiwara, UN Women Representative to Ethiopia, AU, and ECA, Her Excellency, Ma'am Bineta Diop, Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security, AUC, Professor Sarah Agbo, AU Commissioner for Human Resources, Science and Technology, Dr. Tapira Ruemamu, Head of Gender Analysis and Monitoring Division, Women, Gender and Development Directorate. All distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you warm greetings from the Kingdom of Swatini. As Dr. Angela has said, I am representing His Excellency, the Right Honorable Acting Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Swaziland, who unfortunately could not be with us today to make his remarks personally due to other conflicting national engagements. But I'm very happy to be today to make the closing remarks on his behalf. It is a great honor and privilege for me to be part of this continentally important event as we commemorate International Women's Day. We have listened to the rich panel discussions, and it shows that Africa is indeed in good hands to have such a caliber of leaders who are pro-development, with a clear understanding and appreciation of the role of women in the entire journey. This is very commendable. This year, the International Women's Day is celebrated with the theme, Let's Choose to Challenge. Today, we've taken the time to reflect on progress made. We call for change, and most importantly, we celebrate the women and girls who have played an extraordinary role in this endeavor. This year, we celebrate the International Women's Day at a time where the world is hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has disproportionately affected women and girls across the world, and most specifically in Africa. Although the pandemic affects all of communities, its impact is higher on disadvantaged members of the community, such as women, young women, adolescent girls, women from marginalized communities, girls and women in crisis situations, and those living with disabilities. Girls in crisis situations, they carry a double burden in the mitigation of the conflict on the one hand, and dealing with the impact of the COVID-19 on the other. All of these women are particularly affected by the secondary impact of the outbreak. The theme for discussion today has been richly debated, and the call to action to all of us is, let's choose to challenge. Indeed, the challenge is coming from all sectors, and specifically the areas being strongholds of patriarchy and other practices that are an obstacle for the development of women in the continent. We cannot overemphasize the importance of acknowledging the fact that Africa cannot be totally liberated until it cannot be totally developed until all women are liberated and form part of the development agenda. Women should be empowered to actively participate in key decision-making structures and at all levels of our society. If we are serious about improving access to basic healthcare services for girls and women, improving access to education to girls, ending child marriage, challenging traditional gender roles to improve economic growth, as well as building a culture of peace and tolerance. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to start now. We need to be aggressive in our women empowerment programs, at the same time being mindful of the gender gaps and also being tactful in our approach, considering our traditional structures, our values as Africans. As we close this session, allow me to draw your attention to this. From the very deep and rich discussions we've had today, surely we should be able to influence key decision makers in all critical spaces to protect the rights of women and girls, especially at this time of COVID-19. With those remarks, ladies and gentlemen, may I wish all of you a happy International Women's Day. To all of you women, we celebrate you. We love you. Keep doing what you're doing. I thank you. Thank you.
And we thank you, Honorable, for your very calm and appropriate remarks at the close of this very important session. Thank you very much for your presence and for the privilege of your time. I want to close this session this afternoon by once again passing a big vote of thank you from the GMAC Secretariat to each one and every one of you for your time and for your participation this afternoon. I want to thank the activists, the youth. I want to thank you for representing the voices of the women in disability and all marginalized women across the continent. Thank you very much for your time. And as next steps, we will get a summary of the recommendations from the GMAC Secretariat. The GMAC Secretariat has been an excellent organizer of this event. Thank you so much. And may you all continue to enjoy a very happy International Women's Day and choose to challenge whatever constraints there are in your setting to women and girls realizing their rights. Thank you, everybody.
Please, we invite you to open all your mics. Those who want to have the family photos taken, please open all your videos. We are promoting all attendees. Our technical team will take all the photos for us for posting on our various social media platforms.
Recording in progress.
Open